popcorn rice after discussion.
Want to know some more fun facts?
Isn't it awesome to see some of your favorite content creators and favorite people, honestly, that you follow here on this app, be a part of this amazing community called the Nerd Initiative?
It's nice to kind of get, I think everyone's got a story to tell and everyone's story is worthwhile. So
yeah, definitely.
It's kind of nice to get back to like the basics,
that's what I love when I first, sort of learned about Nerd Initiative. I was like, that's perfect. That's exactly what we need, is like just like a site and videos or whatever, just about all this, about just enjoying stuff, because this fandom is quickly going into like negative this and nothing is good anymore, and it's ridiculous because it's all just entertainment, and that's always been my thing.
Exactly.
It's entertainment. None of it's real anyway, and it doesn't matter. None of this matters in the grand scheme of the world and your life, So it should just be fun.
I always define it as, for me, I always say, there's constructive discord and constructive disagreements, which is what makes it. If everyone agreed, it would be boring, right?
Yeah.
I think the second you start to veer into commenting on someone instead of like instead of the nebulous project like She-Hulk or whatever, you can comment and have a fair, constructive, oh, I like this, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I just, when people start doing like, oh, you're stupid because you like this or don't like this, it's so silly. So silly. So what was like your first experience like as a kid, or even like later, like creating, or even just seeing like these seeing like a fandom that you kind of were drawn to, that you were kind of like into and interested in?
Yeah, and I loved, I think JJ did a video for Nerd Initiative about your nerd origin story.
Yeah.
and I stitched that, and I don't know that I have one, other than, or if you could count this, I grew up in the 80s. I was a kid in the 80s, and in the 80s we just had He-Man and superpowers and Transformers and Ninja Turtles towards the later part of the 80s, and Thundercats and Silverhawks. And we didn't have the internet, we didn't have smartphones, and video games weren't really like they are now. So a lot of kids in the 80s, we had toys. Like, we really were into toys and comic books and that kind of thing. So I just had a lot of that stuff growing up. Parents would buy it for me for my birthday and stuff. And so I had all of that stuff just like everybody else did. But I think the difference is I just never left. I just never put those toys away. Whereas a lot of people, as they grew up, they did, So I think that's just sort of, I don't know. I guess it's not how I started, but it's just the fact that I just never stopped, and it's just, and comic books were part of it, but it was just part of it along with all the toys and stuff. But then with comic books, it all started with the 1991 trading cards, the Marvel trading cards.
Oh, I remember those.
Yeah, and a friend of mine gave me some of his extras, and I was like, I don't know who a lot of these characters are, but I want to know all of it. And then we had a comic book shop in my town, and I went and bought some comic books, and then I just never stopped that either. And as I read them, I got more and more into it, so that kind of became my thing. But yeah, I just attribute all of it to just growing up in the 80s, and just all that cool stuff we had back then was so awesome. I mean, it was such a fun decade, I think, to be a kid in.
Yeah, I'm a 90s kid, so I know how fun, and I know what people of this era missed out on, as far as like no internet, so you kind of had to be in person with the local comic shop. Like,
yeah.
It was also such like a golden era too. Like it obviously burned itself out, but the 90s were just like the late 80s and the early 90s were just like blast. What were your go-to, like what were your go-to characters that you were like big into during that era? Like, or is it just like a little bit of everybody?
Just a little. So it's kind of weird, and I don't know if other kids were like this, but I would like, just first, it would be like a knob that gets turned, like, oh, I'm just really into He-Man, and I'm going to play with all my He-Man toys for like a week, and then out of just for no reason whatsoever, that knob would get turned, and like, oh, I want to go play with my Transformers now, and then, oh, I want to go play with Lego, and I want to play with G.I. Joe or whatever. And just every so often, I would just have an inkling that I wanted to play with something else, and I just, so at least in the 80s, like, I just liked it all equally. I think I probably gravitated back towards Lego probably more than most other things. But because I got to be real creative too, which I lost that getting older. but just so much fun stuff that I just sampled little pieces of all of it.
That's great.
Yeah.
And obviously, to what we were talking about a minute ago, like you've seen this is the cool thing. So we're of the same age, which is great. Like you've seen it go from, evolve over time to now, which is great. And I love that you never left. I got out of it a little bit, I think, with high school and college, and then came back into it afterwards. What has that been like? Because again, so many different things. You got so many phases, right? So I think the 80s and 90s was cartoons slash toys slash comics. You had like Death of Superman and Batman. And then you had, obviously the movies came about 10 years later, started to come with like X-Men and Spider-Man and whatever. And then now we have the MCU, and then comics are different now with the variants. And there's,
oh my gosh.
What has that been like to kind of compare and contrast to like that time? Because you've stayed the course and you're someone who's seen the change. I mean, that's fascinating to kind of see an industry change over time. It's just, what is that like?
I mean, I think it's been really fun because I'm glad that this stuff is still around. I'm glad that the stuff that I loved as a kid never left, just as I never left. And I'm glad that it's actually growing because there's even more of it now. I have different thoughts on the different mediums though. Like I love that we get all these movies and TV shows and stuff now based on all this stuff that I like. And I guess maybe that's why I get sort of irritated when, it seems like people aren't appreciative of like, oh, I don't like She-Hulk, but yeah, at least we have a She-Hulk show, because I remember a time when we didn't have the MCU, we didn't have good comic book movies. We barely had comic book movies at all. So I'm just glad that we have anything nowadays. Whether I like it or not, I'm glad for the opportunity to be able to go see them and then make that opinion for myself. But I love that we have all the live action stuff and the animated stuff too. With comic books, I miss how it was before. I get, I'm not a slab guy. I don't care anything about graded comics or the value of comics. Variant covers are cool because I get to pick which one I like, but I don't love that covers are basically just art prints and don't tell you anything about the book. I would much rather go back to the covers of the 70s and 80s. And you got Captain America fighting Red Skull, and I'll stop you, Red Skull. And like, well, what's that issue about? I have no idea, but I want to read it. Nowadays, it's just like, oh, that's a cool picture of Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I guess I'll buy the book because the cover looks cool, but then you open it up and the art's different. You don't know what the story is. So when it comes to comic books specifically, I miss the old days. But with the live action stuff, I'm glad for how it is now.
Yeah, and it's crazy too. Like you mentioned those Marvel cards, and I've started to see them pop up. Like, we do. It's a lot of collecting too. You can't avoid it, right? Even though, like, it's funny when you're around long enough, you can't avoid the collectability of things. And like, I think now VHS tapes are becoming collectible, which is crazy. But those cards, I remember those cards having, and then there were the ones that were like the glossy ones that were really high end. Now they're starting to pop up as like valuable and stuff. And it's just so crazy to see stuff that I'm officially of the age where like my parents say like, oh, my baseball cards were thrown away or old enough to be like, oh, I had that and don't have it anymore.
Right.
What is that like to see stuff like that, like pop up again in it's vintage, which is weird. It makes, I think it makes both feel old, I'm sure. But it also at the same time, you're like, wow, like I remember when this wasn't worth anything and now it's retro and everybody's trying to get them. And if they're perfect condition and all this stuff like that, it does, to your point, it does put a little sour note on the whole fun of it.
Yeah. And, when I see like cards now that are valuable that I have, or comic books that are valuable now that I've just bought, that I just picked up off the newsstand when I was a kid, it's cool. Like, oh, that's neat. That thing I have that I still have from when I was a kid, that's worth a couple $100 now. That's really cool. But it doesn't really excite me. Like, I don't really care because to me, everything that I have, all those cards, all the comics that I have, all the key issues or whatever that I just picked up just because that was the next issue back then, those things mean more to me, like from a sentimental perspective. Because like that is I think a lot about I have Amazing Spider-Man 361, first appearance of Carnage, that I just picked up off of the spinner rack. My dad used to own a convenience store, and he had a spinner rack with a bunch of comics, and I just picked it up off that rack one day. That comic that I have, it's back in this room behind me. That's the one I picked up off the spinner rack. It's probably worth, I don't even know, a couple $100 maybe. I don't care at all because to me, like I'll never send that off to be signed or graded or anything because that's my book. That's the book that I had when I was a kid. You're never taking that out of my hands. even if it's going to come back to me with a signature, with a nice, pretty slab. Nope, that's my. If I want to do that, I'll go track down another one.
Yeah.
But so, and I know a lot of people don't feel that way, but like I just have this weird. I get really sentimental about things, and like the stuff that I have is mine, and I don't care about value because I'm never going to get rid of it. Because it's mine.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it's cool. I see it now. Like, I mean, I watch comics like on social media too, but I also watch like some of these amazing, whether they be restoration or graders or whatever, but there's also in the mix of it, it's cool because there's people that are purists that like love the hobby. I mean, no matter where it goes. And I always tell this story. It just stuck with me. There was one that had, I love the history of it. So there's one that had, I think, someone's name in it. And so he was restoring it for a customer and ended up like offering to buy it from the customer so he could get it back to because the name was on there, back to the family.
Oh yeah.
Like, not, I mean, I think it was such an old book that the person probably wasn't around anymore, but get it to their family. And I think he documented it. And I thought that was just such a cool thing. I mean, that's history, like where the hands it's passed through, people that have like jotted notes in it. I think that is just so much fun. And so you probably have like so many memories, even from like that book of like, oh, this is the corner I dog-eared, when I was reading it or what. I mean, it's just, again, it's the sentimental value is always going to be priceless.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm fortunate enough to where I don't have to sell any, a lot of people talk about the hobby should fund itself. And I love that idea. And for some people, this is a necessity. I'm very fortunate to where my hobby doesn't have to fund itself because my job does that. So I'm able to hang on to that stuff that, just for sentimental reasons. So I just count my blessings for that every day. And because I have that fortune, or I'm fortunate like that, I'm going to hang on to my stuff. I have every single comic that I ever had that went up from 80s and 90s. They're all in this room back here. I've never sold a comic ever. I've traded in some trade paperbacks before because I got like omnibuses, so I didn't need the old trades. So I've traded in that kind of stuff, but I've never sold a comic book. I've never sold any of my trading cards. I've traded it. I've done that with video games. Like I've traded in video games and stuff, but like the stuff that I really, really love, I still have it. I'm never getting rid of it.
That's amazing. Are there other issues like the 361 that like have a lot of like sentimental value to you that like not even worth anything? Like I got it signed recently by Dan Jurgens just because it was cool and we were talking. I had that. The one of the only ones I do have from my childhood is my Superman 75. I just happened to like a lot of them got tossed by my parents and whatever. And it was cool just to have this. I mean, you probably open up at the poly bag and it's like just destroyed, but I don't care. Like I just still have it. It's the one thing I still have. Is there anything like that you have still that like it's kind of means a lot to you? Again, I'm sure there's a couple that have like value to you.
Yeah, there's a couple things like I think it might be over there. I have the very first comic I ever had ever. I think it's DC Comics Presents number 76, I believe. It's got Superman and Wonder Woman. And when I was a kid, I didn't really understand the story, but it was cool seeing them together. I still have that exact issue, and I've got it in a cheap little like comic book frame. And I just, it's beat up, but I like that it is because it shows. I remember reading it dozens upon dozens of times as a kid, like just over and over and over. And then I've got these 4 smaller sized Spider-Man comics that I got out of packs of High C. Like the boxes of High C, and they're reprints of various issues of Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man from the 70s and 80s, but they're like the weirdest little things ever. Some of the pages are they didn't include the full story, and they edited the story to make it look like a 4-parter, even though the original books aren't consecutive. But those were actually my first Spider-Man comics. Were those little ones, and I read them over and over, and they're complete. They're not falling apart, but they're creased up and everything. I love it because I remember as a kid reading those things over and over and over. And this is Spider-Man is awesome, and so those are probably some of my favorites, or my very first ones.
When did you start? Like you mentioned, like start talking about it, like on, like how did you find your way into kind of like? I do think there's a really cool, the good thing about TikTok, and again, all social, there's always ups and downs, right? And the cool thing about TikTok is that I do think there's a community to find. There are these little niches, which is nice. And there's always going to be their downsides. There's nothing you can do about that. I mean, I hope there is, but How did you find yourself doing that and like connecting with other people and talking about it and just having like a fun and like connecting with other fans and similar people? Because I think that's a really cool, interesting journey for all of us. Like the first time we kind of like connected with someone on the platform, we're like, oh, this is really cool. Like I'm enjoying this. Like I actually have someone that I can talk to again about this stuff, and it's not like bugging our wives or or other friends or whatever that don't care about it. So I'd love to hear about that like journey.
Yeah. So my entire life, or it's at least where comic books are concerned, I've never had even one friend in real life, with the exception of one friend like in junior high. I mean, we're still buddies now, but I only had like one friend ever who was really, or I guess two, but I lost contact with one. But I've never really had a lot of people to talk to comics to talk about with comics in real life. So for most of my comics collecting and reading journey, it's just been me, and I've never really had anybody to talk to about them. And that's changed now thanks to things like TikTok, but also when I sort of rediscovered my LCS back in October of 2020, so about 2 years ago. I've met people through there that have become like close friends that we talk about comics all the time. So it's not. So I have people to talk to about it in real life now, but I didn't always have that before. But I always felt like I read this comic and then I have like thoughts and I have opinions and I want to talk about it. I want to talk about the artwork, but I never had anybody. So I just kind of had like all this built up feeling inside. Like I want to express these thoughts, but I don't have anybody to talk to. So I'm like, well, maybe I'll just like talk about them online and go look on. Like I don't do Facebook anymore, but I used to do like Facebook groups and stuff, and those were fun. And
that's awesome.
I was just like, I just need to find somebody to talk to about comics with, because I've never really had a close person in real life to talk to about them. You see like, the stereotypical like, oh, the comic book nerds at the lunch table in school, and they're all talking about. I never had that, right? I mean, I had a billion friends, but none of them were into comics like I was. I was looking for somebody, and social media was the best place to reach a whole bunch of people. And then of course now, especially thanks to TikTok, I've met all kinds of people who are into comics. And so we chat all the time about this cool stuff. And like I said, I've got friends who work in my LCS that I get to talk to too. So now I have an abundance of people to talk to about it. So it's a nice contrast and a welcome one with, growing up when I didn't have anybody.
It's awesome too, because I think that's the peak of what excuse me, what social media can be and should be, right? Is like this personalized, and it's gotten better and better. It's not just one way anymore, where I love, that's the thing I love about TikTok, is the connection, the community of people going back and forth. And I love, you still get some of the, the dodos out there that will respond to you something silly or dumb or talk trash or whatever. But I love getting like I get like the biggest high when someone stitches a video and it's like a positive thing. And it's like, oh yeah, I agree with this, but also did you notice this or whatever? Or I get a cool comment and then you can like reply and have the comment up in part of the video. I think that's the genius of the platform, is that it makes it super easy to do that and go back and forth and have fun and connect with people. And I think that is what social media should be. And I know obviously so much negativity, but it is kind of cool that you can connect with people and have this. And I think for your stories, especially, really powerful, and it's kind of amazing that it's come full circle like that.
It's nice to have so much conversation now, but like I said, social media gets a bad rap, but I like it because it lets you just reach a whole bunch of people that you would never otherwise would have met, and talk about, find like-minded people to talk about stuff with. And if you use social media in the correct way and you don't go seek out all this negative stuff, and people talk about like, well, the algorithm shows me this or that, but the algorithm shows you stuff based on what you consume. So if you're consuming only the things that you enjoy, you'll only get that. And TikTok for me has actually been the most positive of any social media platform I've been on. Like, I don't see a lot of real hateful, negative stuff on there. Like, it's mostly just, hey, look, let me show you this cool thing I got. Like, hey, I want to watch that, and so it's been really, really good.
I always ask people this. I love it. Like, and it can be as simple as like, oh, I just watched something or read something and then I just want to talk about it. What's your creative process like? Like, how does like your mind organize something that you want to put out there? Like, how does that process work? Because I think everyone's got their own, there's no right or wrong way to do it, right?
It's just, and it kind of goes back to that whole thing of, I read a comic and I just like, I have thoughts and I need to sort of spill these thoughts out of my brain, or else it's going to keep building up. So I just want to put something out there, in the hopes that somebody might see it and say, oh yeah, I like that thing too. Or maybe something like, oh, I actually, I didn't know that was a thing that existed, but it sounds cool. Thanks
Yeah.
to you, I'm going to go check that out. Somebody left a comment the other day that said, your videos are one of the reasons why I got back into collecting comics. I was like, holy cow, that's
awesome.
I was like, I love that, because I want everybody reading comics and enjoying this stuff, and finding something they like. And so that's all I've ever wanted, is like just bring more people in. So but yeah, I just have thoughts that I just want to put out there. Or if it's something like She-Hulk, that is very divisive when it shouldn't be. But I believe I sort of have this feeling of like, I want to put positive energy out there, because there's so much negativity, and that negativity is so loud. I like to try to be loud with positivity. So even if it's like an episode, like the wedding episode, it was all right. It wasn't my favorite, but I still wanted to put something out there, just so that I can be another voice to say, I'm enjoying this thing.
Yeah.
And it's fun. It's not exactly perfect, but I'm glad it exists. I'm having fun with it. So I just like to put positive energy out there.
Right.
Just to sort of show, I guess, the world, even though the world's not looking, but just to sort of show people that there are people that enjoy this stuff and have fun with it, and just don't focus on negatives all the time.
So with that said, the last thing I'll ask you is there, what's one book that you're reading right now that you like, one series or one, whatever, and what's one, show or movie or something that maybe people don't know about that you like, that you recommend? Because I love that aspect of like, oh, I recommend this. What's something like in the print form that you're reading that you're into, and what's something that's, whether it's streaming or TV, that people may not know about? I love asking this.
Yeah, comics for sure. One of my absolute favorite comics right now is from DC. It's the Batman Superman World's Finest. It's written by Mark Waid, art by Dan Mora. I absolutely love that book, and I don't know how it's not like the #1 best-selling thing, because it's the closest thing to like just a classic fun superhero story with no ties, and it's not trying to shape the universe or whatever. It's just a fun story of Batman and Superman with great art. So it feels very much like a classic Bronze Age book, but with modern art, modern sensibilities, that kind of thing. It's so much fun. I smile with it. It's always the very first issue I read when I come home. When a new one comes out, I jump straight to that one, and it's never disappointed so far.
Awesome.
So I just think everybody should be reading that. As far as, I don't know, I mean, I'm watching everything else that everybody else is watching, so I'm not really sure what to put out there for movies. I watched this show a few months back called Yellow Jackets. It was on, I think, on Showtime, and it's about this it was really good. And I think a lot of people know about it, but like I feel like not a lot of people. I just feel like it should be bigger than it is. A high school girls soccer team, their plane crashes like in the wilderness, and they're stranded for 18 months. But the story is told mostly in the present day, when they apparently were rescued, but and we see them going about their lives. But weird things happened when they were stranded, and we don't quite know all those things, and we get flashbacks, and apparently we don't know the full story yet, but apparently it got really crazy based on hints they dropped and that kind of thing. That was really interesting. It was a really fun show, and it's coming back for season 2, so we're going to learn more.
I gotta check that out. Yeah, I mean, no, that's like I said. I think that I haven't. I think I've seen it, but I haven't watched it, and so that's the whole point. Like, I'm always next time that I have like one of those moments where like, what do I watch now? Because like there's so much, and it can be like just overwhelming. It'll be kind of cool to be like, all right, let me go check this out and see. And sounds like something I'd want to watch. So.
Yeah, I just, it just has a little bit of good mystery to it. It doesn't give you all, but it doesn't drag on like Lost, because it's only like 10 or 12 episodes, and it's only been for one season. But it every episode, it's like, gosh, I want to find out what's next. Like what does that thing mean? What happened? What did they do when they were stranded in the woods? And we don't know, but we're gonna find out. So I just love little stuff like that.